I have a question. If anyone still has their smartphone on, could you please, on your phone, look up the age of Warren Buffett? How old is Warren Buffett? Now, do most of you know who I'm talking about? You know who Warren Buffett is? The Oracle of Omaha, right? One of the, perhaps, how old? 86. 86, okay. Good, thank you. I was going to guess about 87, then it would have made my math a little easier, but close enough. 86, okay. He's if I'm correct, this week his company, Berkshire Hathaway, is having their annual meeting, right? And this is a pretty significant event. He is, I think, arguably the most successful investor in the last 50 or 60 years. He's incredibly wealthy. In fact, I didn't follow it too closely this week, but I did see one sentence in one of the things I read that said, his company, Berkshire Hathaway, which if you know what it is, Berkshire Hathaway owns other companies. So it's like a holding company for lots of other businesses. Probably you've seen Geico ads on television for auto insurance. My understanding, and fact check this, I'm pretty sure Geico is one of Berkshire Hathaway's companies. So Warren Buffett owns heaps of companies like that. Berkshire Hathaway is so successful that they have cash. This is just cash sitting on the sidelines. This is like the cash that you have in your savings account. You know, it's in addition, it's what's left over after all of your other assets, your homes, your cars and everything. Berkshire Hathaway has $85 billion in cash. Think about it. That's just cash. So this guy is amazingly successful. And people who have invested in him and his company have become very, very wealthy over the years. So with that in mind, I'm going to pose a question to you. If he's 86, I'm going to guess he turns 87 this year. I want to make the math easy. Tell me, in what year did Warren Buffett turn 33? 33. He's 87 now. Anyone got a calculator on their smartphone? Because we're not so smart. Well, if it's 2017 and he's 87, he was 33 52 years ago, what would that be? 1965? Am I right? Okay, in 1965. Correct? '64. 1964. 1964, I think. All right, I have a question for you. Do you think Warren Buffett was more wealthy in 1964 than he is today? Do you think that in 1964 Warren Buffett was recognized and held in such high esteem by so many people in 1964 as he is today? No. What's the difference between 1964 and today? Apart from 53 years.
His success.
His success. Right? We acknowledge that this man, he hasn't been successful for 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 years. He's not a .com, entrepreneur who created some, new software and sold it to Google for $15 billion when they were 29 years old and retired to his yacht. This is someone who for decades has learned and applied his knowledge to investing in building a massive empire. He also happens to be, from what you read bits and pieces, still a pretty grounded man. Does he still live in the same house in Omaha? Right. It wasn't too many years ago where, if memory serves me correctly, I think he donated like $20 billion of his wealth to the Bill Gates Foundation. Correct? I think it was Bill Gates. You can fact check me on all this stuff because I'm pulling it off the top of my head at the moment. But here's my point. We can appreciate how far he has come from 1964 to 2017. So I'm going to ask you a question that for some reason, I've been thinking about this over the last, 6 or 12 months. Can you imagine what kind of wisdom and understanding and depth of awareness and whatever you want to call it, that the world would have gained had Jesus lived to be 87 years old? You think about it. Christianity has been built on the foundation of a 33-year-old man whose public ministry actually only lasted 3 years. So, on one hand, that's truly remarkable to think that in an obscure, distant land, an occupied territory, a carpenter emerged who in 3 years of actual public life left such an imprint that it has informed human history for 2,000 years. Pretty remarkable, huh? That's one side. That's what we were able to receive from that man's life. But then turn to the other side and think for a moment how much we did not or were not able to receive because that life was cut so short. Imagine Warren Buffett. Imagine if he had died in 1967. Or even if he died in 1964 and count back 3 years before that. What was his accomplishment between 1961 and 1964, between 30 and 33 years of age? Would he be today the person that he is? So, do you see where I'm going with this? Because for some reason throughout my unification movement life, and it's probably because my ancestry is strongly Christian, very Baptist, and so I've encountered not just Baptists, but many Christian ministers and leaders in the last 40 years or so. And just in the last 6 or 12 months, I've really been thinking, and I've even asked some of them, what do you think the world, or how much more do you feel the world would have benefited if Jesus could have lived just into his 40s, or into his 50s, or 60s, or 70s, or older? Think what wisdom, think what amazing truth could have been revealed. Think what an example of life this single man may have grown to fulfill. What kind of a model life he could have offered us or offered for posterity. Get married, have children, be a father, be a parent, be a partner, a spouse, dealing with, who's married? Is it easier to be single or in a relationship?
In a relationship.
Yeah, it's easier to be in a relationship. You just scored big brownie points with your missus, with your wife. I mean, we understand, of course, some things are simpler, some things are more difficult. Perhaps the question should be, what is more complex? Remaining an individual or dealing with the vicissitudes and the challenges that come through the dynamics of building a relationship between man and woman, plus and minus differences? Well, where is our model? So, to our Christian friends, as much as on one hand, the miracle of Jesus' life is what he was able to leave after 3 years, but what I think we shouldn't be afraid to contemplate is, what was lost? And do we really think that God would have worked literally for thousands of years to prepare a season, a moment, for him to send his Son, without the intention being for posterity to receive through that Son everything that could possibly be shared through a man? Not just a single man, but someone who married, had a family, and who could teach, who would experience, and through his own experience learn and appreciate, and then to be able to share with others what he was learning and appreciating through the role of husband and parent. So, in that context, I look at our movement, and some of us have been in the unification movement for 5 or 10 years, some 20 or 30. Ron and Wah are not here today, but if they were here, probably nearly 50 years, I think, for Ron. And when I think back to where our movement began, it was a 15-year-old boy in an obscure, distant land, North Korea, which is occupied territory. Korea in 1935 was occupied Japanese territory under the strong heel of Japanese oppression. And the 15-year-old boy on a mountainside in North Korea was praying at Easter time, and in a way pleading with God to explain or seeking to understand why the world was full of so much evil. Why? What's happening? God, this is your world. Why is it in such chaos? And he was experiencing it personally. He was in an occupied, obscure country. No one was coming to liberate them. No one was coming to help the Koreans at that time. So here he was crying out to God. And as we understand it, he had a spiritual encounter with Jesus. And as I've thought about this over the years, the way I explain this to myself, and it might not have any meaning to anybody except me, but I feel like much of what Reverend Dr. Moon, our founder, has spoken of and has shared through his 90 years of life are many of the things which Jesus would have shared had he lived to be 90 years old 2,000 years ago. So I'm just going to give one little example of where I feel what Reverend Moon has shared and what we can learn from that isn't something that sort of contradicts or diminishes Jesus, or contradicts or diminishes the profound and lasting truths to be found in the Bible. But they amplify or they extend that which Jesus himself would have wanted to say, in fact did want to say, but was denied the opportunity to do so. So let me just share with you one, because I've taken a lot of time just on that. There's a proverb, Proverb 29:18. Where there is no vision, the people perish. Goes on a little bit, but when you're giving a talk, you're allowed to cherry pick your quotes, right? So, where there is no vision, the people perish. Actually, I saw this quote on the side of an organic rice milk container in Australia. And it actually said, where there is no dream, a people perish. Maybe it was because it was rice dream. But anyway, they used a little poetic license, I think. But I checked, and every Bible translation uses the word vision. But if I can use a little poetic license, I'd like to stay with dream just for a minute. And it's interesting because it says people without a dream or a vision perish. It doesn't say they die, it says they perish. And there is a distinction, isn't there, between dying and perishing. If something perishes, eventually it ceases to exist. In other words, from a human point of view, it's lost to human memory. Lost. No trace. However, we all die. So, some people die, and if you're Jesus, 2,000 years later, people still remember you. But how many millions and billions of people have died and left really no historical trace? So, perish and die. Where there is no dream, a people perish. But how about the people who have died, who did have a dream? Turn this inside out a little bit. How about all of the people in human history who have lived and died prematurely? Men and women, even boys and girls, children, within whom there dwelt a powerful dream, a powerful vision, deeply held in their soul, and whose lives were taken before they had an opportunity to fulfill that dream, to live out that vision. The context in which I actually saw that quote on a rice milk container in Australia was that I had been asked to give a talk to a football team that I had captained and coached 40 years ago. Because on April 25th in Australia, Australians celebrate Anzac Day. And Anzac Day commemorates an event in the First World War where young Australian soldiers had to storm a beach in Turkey, without going into all the details. And thousands of them died in that, what turned out to be futile exercise. And so I was at the football club visiting on a Thursday evening, just watching training. And the president came over and he said, next Saturday is the Anzac Day commemorative weekend. It's like the weekend of football is dedicated to the memory of these Anzacs, these Australian and New Zealand Army Corps. That's what Anzac stands for. Young men who died at that time. And he said, we used to have an old soldier. We try and find an old veteran to give the talk, but they're all dead. Would you do it? Because you're the oldest guy in the room. I said, oh, thank you. Yeah, sure. But I think, and I had like 5 minutes. This is before a game. The guys are all in their gear. They're all ready to go, right? And they bring in this old guy who's going to give them a talk about the First World War. This is 1914 or 1915 or something. And I saw this quote. And I said to these young guys, because these fellas are aging range from like 18 to maybe their early 30s. And I shared that quote. And I said, perish is to disappear, die with a dream. My question to these young men, and my question to you is, where do the dreams and hopes and aspirations of young men and women who die prematurely go? Do those dreams, do those deeply held longings and aspirations, do they perish? Or do they live on? Is this an existential question? I never really kind of understand what existential means, but it sounds so good when you put it into a sentence. Is this an existential question about, where do we go when we die? Now, again, I've had a chance, and for some reason I crossed the paths with different Christian, particularly ministers. And without naming the denomination, because it's not for the purpose of diminishing someone, but for the purpose of raising a question. I've had some conversations again in the last year or so with a couple of ministers from the same denomination. And I've asked them the question, when we die, what happens? Where do we go? What happens? And in their faith. And this is these churches, whenever you see one of these denominational churches, they're very nice. They're usually very modern. They're well attended. The people are lovely. They're quite prosperous. And the answer you get is, when you die, your body goes into the ground and your consciousness ceases. In other words, if you've ever had surgery and you're lying there and they say, Mr. Jessop, which hip are we replacing today? You say left, then zzz, you're gone. You're not there anymore. That's their, I don't think it's being unfair, but that's their description of death. Zip! You're done. All consciousness ceases, and your body goes into the box. And in their theology, you stay in the box, in the ground, until Jesus returns. At which time your decomposed matter reforms and you come out of the ground as a physical human being. Now, I think there's many questions you can raise around that. But mine is that really what happens? I don't think so. Now, this might be only my opinion. It might only be Reverend Moon's opinion. But this is what I've been taught. This is what I've experienced. This is what I feel. I feel that our consciousness is a deeper reality and a deeper expression of who I am than this physical shell, which is housing it for 60, 70, 80, 104 years, please. I've got to make it till Tracy's 88. I've done the math. But I just feel it. And if you ask yourself, if you feel it, who am I? Am I this shell? Yes, you are. We are. We are this flesh and bones. And it's very, very important that we treasure this gift of life and this body, this temple through which we are granted the opportunity to experience life. Very, very important. But this flesh and bones was never created to last forever. From dust to dust. Physical. But from our first physical breath, we are also born as an eternal spiritual existence that never dies. So when our time is done and this body gives itself up to the earth, it's what we have become and it's what we are at that moment that continues for eternity. So, I'll just give you some statistics, because this is a little tiny snapshot of human history, and I want you to hear these statistics from the perspective of unfulfilled hopes and dreams of human history. First World War was waged 100 years ago, between 1914 and 1918. And you know I'm a dual citizen. I'm a US and Australian citizen. Australia, and I'm sharing this, I'm Australian, so I can share this story. Whatever your background or lineage is, I suspect you can find a similar example in the history of your country, your forebears. But Australia in 1914 had a population less than 5 million, about 4.96 million people. To give you some perspective, Atlanta, Georgia, the city of Atlanta, has 5.7 million people today. So the entire population of the continent of Australia was smaller than the city of Atlanta today. During the 4 years of the Great War, the First World War, 420,000 men from Australia voluntarily enlisted to fight in that war. It was almost 39% of every male between the age of 18 and 44 enlisted to fight in that battle. And keep in mind, this is a battle thousands and thousands of miles away from Australia. In the First World War, Australia was never threatened. Second World War was different. First, never threatened. It was an act of fidelity to the Empire, British Empire, which was under attack. So again, think about it. 4 out of every 10 males between 18 and 44 disappeared from society. Can you imagine, even in Sacramento, if 4 out of 10 men just were gone? The bank managers, the butchers, the bakers, the candlestick makers, the factory workers, the salespeople, the school teachers, the farmers, the labourers. 4 out of 10, gone. Gone to war. And over a 4-year period, of those 420,000, almost 60,000 died. 59,357 died, and 155,000 were wounded in combat. So, over 200,000 of the 400,000 were dead, were killed, or came back, in some cases, terribly wounded. And that's just the physical wounds. let alone the emotional scars carried by the survivors. So just imagine. And I don't know whether, has anyone in this room seen the movie Gallipoli?
Yes.
Okay, it's an old movie, one of Mel Gibson's earlier movies. I'll encourage you. Again, this is, please understand, this is more than just, I'm trying to promote something Australian. It's just an illustration. If you can rent that movie, even for young people, rent that movie and watch it. And after you've watched it, you'll understand really why I'm recommending that. Because you had young boys, 18, 19, 20, coming off the farms, coming out of the factories, and going to fight on the fields of France or Belgium, and just being butchered. And so as I said to those young footballers, what happened to their dreams? These are young men just like you, young women just like you, who have hopes and dreams. Maybe their fiancé was waiting back in Australia. Maybe they're already married and they had young children and a wife back home. And they were looking forward to their dreams and visions of how they were going to raise their family and the kind of life they had, and their lives were sacrificed. Where do those dreams go? They do not go into a box and to black. They live. And every single soul that's ever inhabited a physical body on this earth, when they died, have died with some degree of vision, hope, dream, aspiration, unfulfilled. And that's sort of the positive spin on it. There's a whole other set of people, whether young or old, who have passed away, and their lives, you could say, maybe didn't have any dream or aspiration. They were just flat out selfish, evil, manipulative, nasty people. And when they died, the opportunity to do anything about the legacy of evil or despair or whatever that they left behind, that died with them. They can't change anything. So by definition, what is hell? Hell is the place. It's the dwelling place of those whose fundamental essence while they had life was selfish, evil, manipulative. You know, our founder, Reverend Moon, he named 3 kind of sins by which we condemn ourselves. First was sexual misuse of love, infidelity. Think about the lives that have been damaged, the hearts that have been broken throughout all of human history. Today, through the misuse of love. And Charles was talking about this a couple of weeks ago. Think how many lives are being destroyed today by pornography. Because it's connected to that. So that's one biggie. The second, stealing or misuse of public money. If you have ever stolen anything that didn't belong to you, a candy bar from a store when the storekeeper wasn't watching, I did that. I've been guilt-stricken for 60 years. But it's true. You know, steal anything. Or perhaps even worse, abuse and misuse public trust. You know, when you hear of an agent or a bureaucrat in a government agency who steals like hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars, that person's cursing themselves. And then the third, don't hurt any time you've hurt someone's heart. As a parent, if you hurt your child's heart. As a friend, if you betrayed another friend. As a partner, a husband or a wife. if you betrayed your partner, you hurt someone's heart. When you die, that pain, because when you die, there's no veneer, there's no longer any rationalization behind which to protect yourself. Everything's revealed. So in this context, we've got how many billions of people who have died and who are carrying their eternal regret. And on the other side, how many billions of people have died and are carrying an eternally unfulfilled dream or hope. So then, where does the Bible talk about this? Does Jesus ever give any guidance about this? He couldn't. He was killed too soon. He didn't have time. He himself said, there's so many things I want to share with you, but you cannot bear it yet. So many things. So this is the example that I if you can remember it very early when I first started talking. This is where I believe what Reverend Moon has been able to grasp is the unspoken truths that Jesus was originally destined to reveal, but whose premature death, through the faithlessness of a people who were prepared to receive him, but who rejected him, this is the kind of truth that Jesus would have wanted us to know. And as shocking as it may be for a lot of Western Christian people, it was a North Korean who Jesus saw the heart of and who called to become, at the very least, a spokesperson or a conduit through whom the unspoken truths that Jesus harbored and carried in his heart and went to his crucifixion within his soul. There's someone through whom he can share. And so the answer to the question is, where do these dreams and hopes go? Where does all this regret, how is it harvested? How do we fulfill the dreams? How do we retire the regret? What's the answer? Through me and through you. We are connected to human history deeply, profoundly, irrevocably, whatever the word is. Human history. Here am I. Here are you. We're at the apex. And behind us, my mum and dad, my grandma and granddad on this side, my grandmother and grandfather on this side, and you go back, 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 back. Where did you get the shape of your nose from? Your ears? Your physical shape and form? Did you create it? Did you design it so that you'd come out this way? It's a consequence of your history. It's mum and dad. It's grandma and granddad. There's an ad on television right now, and the lady's always wearing a high neck. You know the ad I'm talking about? She's always wearing a high... Why?
Double chin.
She's got a double chin. And you look at the portraits of the ancestors on the wall. They've all got the big ruffles, right? Because they're hiding their double chins. So we know physically, we understand, or even scientifically, that our physical form doesn't stand in isolation from history. It's a manifestation of it. That's our physical form. What about the personalities? What about the aspirations? What about the hopes and dreams of our ancestors that were never fulfilled? Well, what about the dark side of our histories? Where we've got a past littered with evil, despair, deep, deep regret, mistakes that have been made, all of that history, spiritually, comes to me. It comes to you. And it comes to each of us perfectly, uniquely. And therefore, what in part is the purpose of our life? Of course, we have a personal and individual purpose, just like we have a personal and individual physical body. But we also have an eternal purpose. And that eternal purpose is fulfilled when we fulfill our own lives, live well, do well, but realize and be aware that through our lives we are also, on one hand, receiving the inspiration, the hope, the encouragement that you can do it, come on, hang in there, from that side of our positive ancestry. And then on the other side we've got ancestors that are saying, please, please, help me to liberate myself from the change that I bound myself in through the mistakes I made in my generation. And so sometimes we wonder, I'm a really good person, we say to ourselves. How come life is so hard? Why am I struggling so much with my wife, my husband? Why the incredible conflict sometimes between myself and my children? Or this person at work, or this personality, or why am I tempted at times in ways that I know are wrong, but where does this energy come from? In this context, it's coming from that place which calls us to the role of dream fulfiller and regret retirer. Dream fulfiller, regret retirer. So that we can be, for the people who have gone before us, their champion. And there's not one human being alive on the earth today, anywhere, in any culture, in any nation, any religion, who is not a champion for the ancestors whose lives they represent. That's how valuable we are. That's how precious every single human being, living soul is. And so the message that I wanted to bring today, I guess, was that history doesn't end. And our lives do not end when this physical body passes away. We simply transition into the next realm. And once we're there, it's very difficult actually to fulfill a dream or to retire a regret, because we need someone with a physical body to assist us, and someone with a physical body through whom we can fulfill and realize this. And so for Western Christianity in particular, there's sort of a no-go zone when it comes to ancestors. You talk to most Christians about ancestor worship, and what kind of reaction will you get? Ooh, that's some weird Eastern, cult type thing, it's weird. Actually, it's not. We're not talking about ancestor worship. But we do, and Reverend Moon recognizes clearly, if we have the mind and the simplicity of heart to permit it entry, he's simply recognizing the eternal truth that we are the tip of an iceberg, the apex of a mountain. And the final thing I would say in concluding is that whatever we accomplish in our lives for good, we bequeath to the next generation as a gift. So dad, mum, every interaction that your children see between you, young dads and older dads. Everything we become, everything we're able to fulfill in our life, and every historical regret that we are able to retire is the gift that we bequeath to posterity. So how important is your life? And if you're young, you're so blessed because you have decades and decades and decades to live wonderful lives with the recognition that you are helping to fulfill the unrealized dreams of those who've gone before you. Maybe that might even be your own parents. And at the same time, retire the regret and break the chains of those in the past who have committed awful crimes, who have hurt people, and who need to be liberated. So, for some reason, this was a message that wanted to be spoken today. So, I hope it resonates with you in some way, and that it will really, it does to me, it informs my approach to life every day. Every day. Because I feel like I need to share this one final story. When I was 19 years old, I got married. I graduated Teachers College on the 11th of December 1970. On the 12th of, that was a Friday, on the 12th of December 1970, I married my college sweetheart. I hardly had any money. We hardly had any money. I remember we had to wait to our first paycheck, and our teaching year didn't start for like 6 weeks. So we didn't have hardly any money for a honeymoon or anything. So we went to the beach place. We stayed in a relatively inexpensive motel. And on our way back to Melbourne, because this is in Australia, we visited, I think this couple were not even a relative. I believe either the husband or wife had grown up as a neighbour of my wife's parents, father, I think it was. And they lived in a country town, which was sort of, we went to, honeymoon was here, Melbourne was here, they lived in a country town in the middle, and we stopped there on our way back to Melbourne. At the time, they were probably about 50 years old. This was a couple, just a humble couple living in a country town. He was a tradesman. He wasn't rich. His home was very humble. Very humble. But they took us into their home, and we stayed there for a week. Ron and Ivy, I cried. Ron and Ivy Davies. As I said, I don't think they're even blood relatives. But the kindness and the generosity. Basically to strangers. And I don't think we even left them a box of chocolates to say thank you. Maybe we left them a box of chocolates for 5 days, room and board. And now, 46 and a half years later, have they perished? They're dead. Long gone, physically. Have they perished? They will live forever. Even if it's just in me, in my mind, in my memory. So just think, today, this week, you may be given an opportunity to leave a memory in someone's life that will last forever. So, if we live like that, how precious is life? Okay, that's it. Thank you. God bless you.